My name is Ben Bolstrum. I am the editor-in-chief of the Schoolcraft Connection, and today I have a very special guest with me. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, hi, I'm Urmila Bilgi, and I used to study at Schoolcraft. So that's a special connection, and I learned many things while I was there. I was also very lucky to work with the connection team. Today, I am here as a mother of two kids, and I have written a book called Morāmbā, a tangy story of childhood.
That's so cool. So it sounds to me like the catalyst for your book began in 2008 when you left India. Is that correct? And if so, what was that like, coming to a new country?
I think that's one of the hardest things I have done. One of the hardest things I've done in my life. It was hard because I grew up in a very protected and privileged environment back in India. I had everything, at my parents were around, my entire village was around, so life was much easier. And leaving all that was very difficult. The minute I landed here in January, which is like the coldest period, and it was just like that, extremely cold. I knew no one, and my husband used to travel for work. So that was the first time in my life, like I never spoke to anyone, and I was all by myself. So that is how hard it was. And when I talk about being privileged, what I mean is, it was so easy overall. I felt so I was a journalist back in India, and I remember when I wanted an internship, I just walked into this newspaper office, national newspaper office in Mumbai, and I said I want to meet the editor because I want an internship. And I did end up with an internship that day. So, like in that sense, it was very difficult to establish myself in this country. It has been worth it, but it was hard.
I believe it. That's a big change. So when you moved to the States, you wanted to pursue children's literature. Why that specifically?
When I was in India, I did my master's in communication studies, and as part of my final thesis, I did a content analysis on a children's newspaper, and that's how I actually got to know that there is content focused specifically to kids, and it got me interested in what else is available out there. And my husband was already in the States, and not my husband, my fiance back then, and he was in Michigan, and I was looking through all the programs, and I didn't want to pursue journalism again. So I thought of looking at other programs which I was interested in. And since this children as the audience of media was another interesting thing that I thought, I started working on my applications back then, and Eastern Michigan had a program specifically addressed to children's literature. And I was my aim was to work for a publishing company that specialized in children's literature. So that's how I ended up with the EMU. At EMU.
Interesting. I definitely have more to ask you about Eastern Michigan, but for now, so you've decided on children's literature. How did you come up with the concept for Morāmbā?
When I pursued my children's literature, I did do some creative writing classes over there as well. And even though I was absorbing all the information, I did want to write at some point of time. But it is really, the challenge is to come up with a good story. While I was absorbing all that information that I studied during my master's in children's literature, it was just a lot of theory, and I wanted to focus in terms of how it reflects in creative writing. And what I realized is that I really like reading and writing about realistic fiction. So definitely what I was going to write, I had this the entire baggage or repertoire was going to come from where I was. I was not going to sound someone who lives here and that takes away the authentic part of it. I was in this position where I could actually use all that experience from the past. So how did I come with a concept? So I specifically remember, so I am the 2000 generation, okay, like I 2010 grade, pass out. So this is when the Y2K was going to take over the world, and we were talking about all those things. And then when that's the time in 99, the globalization happened, and we started noticing a lot of changes in India. And one of it, I specifically, I realized that this buying power in people was increasing. And, the current lifestyle was becoming a little simpler. And there were actually apartment homes built in the 70s and 80s, which didn't have a provision for parking lots. And people were actually, cutting down trees to make more space. So I had this, and this has happened to quite a few people in my community. And I know that sense of attachment to these trees and plants. And so that is how it started. But of course, it can't be just that. And then over the period of time, it grew with a character and this whole idea of adult child and adult authority. I think it literally grew into a Morāmbā. So.
You mentioned the challenge of coming up with a story and how that takes so much time. How would you inspire yourself to continue writing even when things got difficult and didn't want to write someday, too busy? How did you go on with that?
It's like you said, it is challenging, but you have to, I was at a point where I really wanted this to happen for me. So I thought I had no choice. If I want to do it, it has to be right now. So you just have to get yourself in the routine and just keep writing whatever it is. Even if you think, sometimes, I just ramble on the page and I have to take a break because it doesn't make sense anymore. But then when you revisit it the next day, it sounds so much better, and then you can just edit it and add more ideas. The thing about writing a novel, especially, I've realized is it just takes time. And even when you asked me to write that interview, I took my time. I wrote something down and then I revisited. And a great thing about technology is that I do have Google Docs, and I can sometimes when I'm at the grocery store and this idea strikes, I can just make a point on my, it's amazing, and it is same across my iPad or my computer. So that platform is great too. So it helps, using technology in that sense.
You talked a little bit about the cultural significance of Morāmbā with globalization in India and that kind of concept. Is there any other influences or cultural significance inside the book?
Let's start with the cultural significance of Morāmbā. So Morāmbā is basically mango marmalade. And this mango marmalade is different from other marmalades because this literally gets better as it ages. So that is the idea that I wanted to draw, that the adults, and rather the kids and the adults, both of them get wiser with all the experiences. They get better. And it's mango because it's the mango tree. So all these experiences coming together and everyone getting better, just like the mango marmalade. So that is the biggest cultural significance. That is why I wanted the book to be, that was a tricky thing actually, to name a book in an Indian language, but the entire book is in English, right? But at the same time, I think it just brings back, it puts together the cultural significance.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. That's a great name for it. So you've come to the States, you want to write this book, and you land at Eastern Michigan University to get a degree in Spanish literature. Right. How did this help you on the path for writing Morāmbā?
Let me tell you what when I was working on my thesis back in India, I think I focused mostly on how the news is not designed specifically targeted to kids. And my biggest idea was I think I misunderstood that kids are innocent and they don't get anything, and literature given to them has to be sweet and has to have happy endings and nothing serious, and and all of this changed after children's literature happened in my life, and not just that, but the theory, the way to look at a piece of literature, how to interpret, how to understand all these things. I think my entire definition of children's literature, and the first thing that you learn is that children's literature is marginalized, which itself gives out a lot, and that is the biggest takeaway from my course over there. So I started thinking in those terms, like how it can be actually empowering, how it can bring in characters that are not like just one dimensional, and how I can make them into something more. And I have this cultural repertoire plus this understanding of this new understanding that I had about the theory in children's literature. So I wanted to marry those new ideas and something from my culture, and that is where EMU played a big role. Every course that I took, theory in children's literature or the myth course, all of this has helped me understand what kind of ideology I want to pick while writing, what is the philosophy behind something. And finally, I mean, that's how EMU helped me come up. But that is not when I came up with Morāmbā. It was just brewing. It helped me, come up with, I had an idea what it has to be, but I didn't know what it was going to be.
So it solidified there.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to add was, even though I was already published back in India, I think I learned a lot about writing from my teachers at EMU. And that was even today, I was so nervous sending them the copies of my books. I'm pretty sure my teacher is going to sit with a red pen and she's going to make marks over. So it was, so that was another big thing, that I learned through this course, writing and simple things being more active in your style than using passive sentences. And I think I owe that a lot to Eastern.
Wow. Okay. And after all of that time, you go to Schoolcraft to, as you say, hone your technology skills.
Right.
How did this factor into just your general knowledge to writing Morāmbā?
Yeah, here was the thing. The reason why I chose to go back to Schoolcraft, I wanted a work permit to work in the US. I did have a student visa and I did my couple of internships. But after that, to get a work permit, it's a little complicated. These visas are mostly, it's slightly easier for engineers and people from the STEM careers. But it gets a little bit challenging when it comes to careers in the writing field. And that's when I realized that I didn't have all the technical skills that were required. Many programs, especially at publishing houses, they had marketing positions which required you to do InDesign, brochures in InDesign, and need to get your hands dirty in Photoshop and things like that. So that's when I thought Schoolcraft was the right place where I could, work on these skills. And that was a great decision in hindsight. And even I got to work at the Connection. That is where I could apply all the skills I had learned from graphic design. And I used to write a column there. I don't know if you got a chance to read that, but Diary of an Immigrant. And so literally I could use all my skills. So Schoolcraft was, in that sense, they supported me a lot. And Todd and Reena over there, they're amazing. They really helped me overcome the other challenges, technical and the visa related challenges as well. So in that sense, yeah, Schoolcraft helped a lot. And the other thing, the magic happened in Professor Dolgin's class. It was a creative writing class, and that is when I actually got into, writing, because even though I'd taken creative writing classes, I never focused specifically on a story. I just focused on working on my homework and getting things done, or maybe just write it for the timing. But this story just stayed with me, and I was fascinated because I had started designing the cover in Professor Colleen's class. So I think it just stayed back, and I thought it had potential. But like I said, I froze after that. Like, it was shelved. The project was shelved for a very long time.
I definitely want to get to that too. You mentioned your time as an undergraduate in journalism and how much that has stayed with you throughout all of this time. Are there any other details there that helped plant the seeds for Morāmbā?
How report, in that sense, journalism background and reporting has helped me. So like I said before, I lived a very protected and privileged life, but when I took up journalism, I started getting out of my comfort zone in India, and I started looking out for stories that I was kind of scared to explore as this protected child. And in that sense, it was definitely helpful to think out of the box of what it could be. This story is definitely, I wouldn't say like it is directly applicable, but yeah, in the sense, getting out of your comfort zone and writing something, in that sense, definitely journalism helped me a lot.
So after all this time, as you mentioned, you eventually stopped working on Morāmbā.
Right.
So,
right.
Why was this, and what happened during that 8-year period where you weren't actively working on the book?
Right. So, like I said, I was struggling to get a work permit in the States for a very long time, and I went through like periods of frustration because I was not able to work, and I intended to work so badly. Like, one time I even went to New York, and I went to every possible office, HarperCollins and random book house. And it was at that point of time, I was like standing in front of a temple and praying that please just accept me. And I left my resume, and but the challenge over there was, like the work permits, they don't come that easy. So that was my like peak period of frustration, not being able to get into the system. That was one big part of frustration, that I went in self-doubt, like whether I can do anything at all. Because once you start working, you keep working, you build your confidence, and plus I was in another country, so that you already have those apprehensions. Added to that, you are in another country. You can imagine the frustration I was going through. So plus I was I also wanted to have kids, and the whole biological clock, it has to play a part. So I did have my first baby in 2014, and then in 2015 the Obama administration actually permitted a kind of a work permit for dependent status, which I was on, and that's when I started working. I took up a new job, and again, whenever you get a new job, you have to put in the hours time, and I was not even thinking about finishing my book. But eventually, I think it was like I always knew I wanted to do it. I didn't know when it was going to happen. So eventually, I think I just I decided that it was now or never. Like, this was the time to it, and finally I started taking baby steps towards it and started it bit by bit.
You mentioned in our original interview that there was a situation with 2 of your friends that inspired you to keep on writing, to continue after so long. Would you like to talk more about that?
So just for our audience, like I lost two of my friends around it was 2018. And besides the loss, I mean, the loss was the biggest thing, and it still is with me. Like whenever I think about them, like I still feel the pain. But the biggest, so one of them was like, she was hardly 30, and the other person, we worked as editors on a cultural magazine. I did the layout, and he was the editor for the magazine. So he was a little bit older than me. He had two kids. The other one was 30-year-old. She was a graphic designer. I think it was a shock. Like the 30-year-old one passed away suddenly out of nowhere, and the other one fought cancer. The biggest takeaway from that was like, whatever you have to do, like you have to do it now. You never know what's going to happen. And I think that just stayed with me, and it got me started, and it kept me focused that like this is all you have. And one thing I remember, the next day when I went to this friend's house to see her parents, the one who was 30-year-old, she was a graphic designer. She had done a book for her niece, and that book was on the table. And I looked at it, like it was hard not to notice it, and I picked it up, and I thought I had a part of her even with us today. So yeah, that still it stayed in my mind, and it'll be there forever. I think that gets you going,
Of course. So we're 8 years later, and you're in a very different place from where you began. You're truly inspired. You have a family now. How did that put into perspective when writing?
A lot. Like, so initially when I was writing, my entire frustration was, it was kind of a vent from children's perspective, like how these adults treat us. But when I became an adult, I thought I was not going to be one of them. I'm going to be much more understanding, and I'm going to have this gentle parenting philosophy. But when you get into day-to-day things with kids, it's challenging. It's not easy to, keep working with them every minute. And even in spite of that, I realized sometimes I do yell at them, if whatever my philosophy is, but sometimes you end up yelling at your kids. So in that terms, I had a big growth curve as a writer. Like I wanted to balance out my story and make it sound fair to adults as well. And I wanted to bring in this, but I had written this to you, that the challenge in doing that was I didn't want to say that the adults are heroes. The crux of the story lies in the fact that adults can be unreasonable, and they are unreasonable most of the times from a child's perspective. So I didn't want to mess up that point of view, but definitely wanted to add something that would make them a little more fair. And that's the perspective I got in when I realized that, this is what I do with my kids, that when I realize I yelled at them, I will eventually go and talk to them. I'll try to find a solution which can be, which seems fair to them as well. So that's the growth curve, that adult in the story has. So he also goes through some kind of learning as the kids. So in that sense, I didn't keep it, I thought it was balanced, and that's the point of view I got in as a writer.
Right. So that's a big shift from your draft. Was that difficult to change, or did it come pretty naturally with all your experience? No, it was hard in the sense that I couldn't come up with an end that was that seems sensible to me. And
I wrote so many ends and I was not happy with the way it was ending. So, and I wrote something and then like I scrapped it and then I wrote another, and then finally and you know, we think that these things will just, you know, they just click. But in this case, it did not click. It was literally work of revision. Like, okay, this sounds better. This sounds more reasonable. Sometimes, yeah, it's a click. Like a lot of things are a click while writing. Like you're in the shower and you think of it and, you know, you gotta write it. But in this case, I think it was a lot of hard work and revision. That, okay, this sounds sensible. And, you know, like, and as you go through the chapter, you get to know in depth some of the characters that are relevant. And, you know, like, and that's when in around the 9th chapter is when you get to know about the strong adult figure. And I thought that actually pieced in together very well in the 9th and 10th chapter.
Okay. Okay, so after all of these revisions, it's 11 years in, I believe. And you finally you accomplished your goal. You finished writing. That had to feel great. How did that feel?
So when I finished when I declared that I had finished it, the first thing that came to my mind was, so around that time, all of my friends and all of us were popping babies, okay? So so the first friend who had her baby, I went to see her in like the first few hours. And you know, the first thing her husband says to me is that, okay, so the easy part is now over. And I was pregnant actually. I was going to deliver in a few more months, and I was looking at it like, you think this is like the easy part? Like, do you think that like your wife just popped out a baby? Do you think that's easy? And you know, that is exactly what I thought of when I finished my book. Like, the easiest part is now over. The hard part is, you know, finding your soul readers, marketing the book, publishing it, getting it published, finding publishers. Do you self-publish or do you, you know, find a traditional publisher? What are your options? How are you going to market it in India? How are you going to market it in Australia? Like, you know, like a big chunk of my readers are going to come from my community. And this community is like spread all over the world. How am I going to reach them? You know, so that is exactly what I felt like. I was overwhelmed even more after I finished my book.
So your book's complete. We know so much about you now. Can you tell me a little bit about the plot of Morāmbā?
Okay, so a lot of it has to be secret because, of course,
of course.
So it's just going to be a teaser. So these kids love to play under this tree, but the adults are now threatening them that they'll take it down. So there is this big conflict between adults and kids, and how it is resolved. That is the basic plot, but it's just not that story. There's a lot happening in between, and like why these kids love this tree. It starts from that, and then like what kind of conflicts develop between adults and kids. So it takes you from there, and then finally to the resolution. What exactly happens?
Can you tell me a little bit about your protagonist, Avani?
Okay, so to appreciate Avani's character, you have to basically imagine how the society was back in the 90s. And like the kids were expected to be very, you know, idealism was appreciated amongst kids, which means extremely well-behaved kids all the time. And someone is, especially if they're strong-willed, that wasn't appreciated, and those kids really had a hard time. So Avani is a strong-willed child. So you can imagine a girl and being strong-willed. Around that time, it was never that easy. So she was considered to be misbehaving, and a little another dynamic that is added to it is like people will obviously judge such a kid. And at the same time, you know, as parents, you're worried, like, okay, if you don't behave like a girl, who's going to marry you, or you know, things like that. So yeah, so Avani is basically a strong-willed girl who will, the basic understanding is like, you cannot look into the eyes of an adult and talk to him or her. You have to be very respectful, which means you have to look down and, you know, talk politely to them. But of course, you're threatening to take away her tree. What's going to happen to someone who is strong-willed? And you know, all of that it comes through that character. And at the same time, it's not all goody about her. Like, I have shown you know, the other side, where, you know, other choices that she makes, that you know, it's not only about building sympathy around her, but the character is pretty much realistic. I don't want to give a lot what happens, but there are other things, you know, even from her part of character that you may not like about her. So in and all, I think it's a very realistic character.
Okay, wow. So growing up, globalization, what themes from your life have you interwoven into this book?
So the primary themes are adult authority, adult-child relation, and bullying, and how it's all correlated. So way adults are going to treat, that is what the kids hear, and they'll behave in the same way. So that is the basic theme, but there are other smaller themes such as tree conservation, because like cities, they hardly have any trees, and because of parking lots, you are even losing what you have. I mean, that's that, like I said, that was primarily happening back in the 90s while growing up. So that became part of the theme, a little bit part of the theme, that the tree conservation. Then there is things about kindness, being gritty, about, you know, getting what she wants, and surviving in this 90s world. And a big chunk is also about minimalism, where, you know, this in simple Indian culture has been portrayed throughout the book many times, from the middle class community. And I think that's a big part of me even today while growing up over here, because like things are like really big in the US, like there's so much food around all the time. And so I thought like minimalism and simplicity was another big thing. I mean, it's all in the narrative embedded. It's not very obvious. It plays through the characters.
So with all of this in mind, what do you hope readers get out of Morāmbā?
Oh, I want them to enjoy the story, like see the simpler times back in the 90s. Like there were no like there is a mention of Nintendo, but it was just like one thing, and we couldn't like play it for hours together or anything. So apart from that, I think I really want them to see how simple a life was. And that can be like not just Indian readers, any reader around the world. I think they'll be able to see, because like now our life is very different. Like we are like chatting to each other through this technology. So yes, definitely, I want them to enjoy that. And for many of us, it's a nostalgia. Like going through this book is extremely nostalgic for people who grew up in that time in India. So that's a big part. And for kids, I think I want them to know that adults are just going to be that way, and you have to, you know, work around them. And the same messaging is for adults as well, that, you know, be more kind and be more understanding towards kids.
What do you say to these specific readers that might read Morāmbā?
So when I wrote the book, I did add some questions after every chapter. The thing about that was, like, whenever I read anything with my kids, and then for a second I have to think of what I'm going to discuss with them. and it's such a great way of engaging with your kid. Like all these every chapter comes with certain questions that you can discuss with your kids, and sometimes there are some activities. So the whole idea was like parent and child engaging together and like pursuing an activity. So I think I want adults and kid both to enjoy this book together.
That's great. That's fantastic. What would you tell others who have dreams of writing a book like you did?
Do it now. Just do it. Just do it. There is no other way. Like there are many tools nowadays available to get started, to put your ideas together. Whatever gets you working, just go for it.
I love it. And finally, last question. Do you have any future writing plans? Do you want to give us the scoop?
Oh yeah, of course. So now I'm unstoppable. I'm going to write, and I have found I think a way to get it done. So I do have I have already started working on my next book, and planning to release picture book hopefully by next year, or and there's another novel coming up, actually a picture novel, hopefully 2 years from now. But yeah, definitely, and it's going to be centered around. So now that my life is happening here, and I want to write about the experiences of I mean not just me, but from a child's perspective of being growing up in an Indian family in the US. There is a dearth of Asian books by Asian authors, which are specifically written with experiences about us growing in this culture. So I want to address that gap, and want to write more related to South Asian experiences while growing up in the States.
Wow, I am excited to hear more about that. Thank you so much for coming. You can buy Morāmbā on Amazon. You can find out more about the book Central Theme on Urmila's blog, your Wix blog, I believe. And you can read my story about Urmila and her book, all posted below. Is there anything else you would like to shout out?
I actually want to send a shout out to my my illustrator, who did a fantastic job, and the images are very engaging. So I think, let me show you the first one. This is a very this sums up the theme, where the parent, not intentionally but is definitely in a hurry to go somewhere and doesn't understand the kid's agenda. So
I love that. That looks great.
So
thank you so much for coming again.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.